Hi guys! Before we do anything at all, we need a beer. This is the Raspberry Stout. Cheers. Today we'll be dry hopping a pale ale with quite a lot of hops. The problem with hoppy beers is that they are super sensitive to oxygen. So think about what you can do in every step to reduce oxygenating your beer after fermentation, or even after, say, about 12 hours into fermentation. Then you should take every precaution available to you. And there's a lot of ways to do this. One is to ditch the secondary. One is to dry hop before fermentation has ended. In my case, fermentation has ended, so we will have no more push from the beer. There's still a lot of things you can do. We're gonna go through a couple of things today. You can ditch the secondary. You don't really need it, even when dry hopping. And of course, purge and flush as much air out of there with CO2 as you can. This is your friend. I'm kegging, but I bottle when I want to send out beers, and if you bottle beers and naturally carb them, it's very important as well. But when you naturally condition beers, you have to take every precaution as well. One precaution is to ditch the bottling bucket and go straight from the primary fermenter into the bottle. Of course, flush the bottles. I will show you how I do that. I ain't gonna bottle some beer, but I can still show you the way I do it. And of course, when you keg, you have to flush out the air and so on. Flush out your hoses, transfer from tap instead of using an auto siphon if possible. When we're dealing with beer that ain't that hoppy, it ain't the same problem. But a hoppy beer can go bad in just a few weeks. So if you naturally carb in bottles, it can actually be destroyed before you even had a chance to drink it. If you really get into this, it will be a lifesaver, especially for you who bottle beers. So let's start by showing you. And this is an ordinary, the cheapest soda stream I could find. And on this I attached a hose. I prefer this little softer, it's not silicone, but a little softer than a hard beer line. This is a little bit better. For bottle it doesn't make that of a difference, but later on. What you do when you bottle beers, if you're naturally carbing beers, I would put sugar directly into the bottle, one of those carbonation drops, so we can ditch one transfer from the fermenter or the secondary fermenter to the bottling bucket. So in goes a carbonation drop, or whatever you're using. We purge from the bottom to the top, so we push out the air. And then we fill up with beer, and then after we release the wand, we push out the air and cap immediately. When counterfilling from a keg, of course, you have already carbonated the beer, so you don't put any sugars in it. Purge. A little longer than that. Fill up beer. Lift up the wound. And then we fill a little bit more beer here. So we disturb the beer and then we can cap on foam directly. So you don't have to purge the headspace. There's a lot of rumors going around and people saying that and that and that on the forums and on the internet and on videos and all that. That the oxygenation when bottling is not a problem because the yeast will eat up the oxygen when you start the secondary fermentation. That's a lot of crap. So maybe I should back up that statement, or at least explain what I'm basing that off. I did an experiment when I bottled and natural carbed some hoppy beers. And I did a couple of beers the natural way, flushed the bottle with CO2, and the other one I flushed. And in a couple of weeks there were major difference between the ones that had been flushed and the ones that didn't. And I tried that with at least 2 different beers. And they were both hoppy beers. So that's what I'm basing that off. Feel free to do the experiment yourself. Cheers guys, let's get back into the shed. Always stay clear of oxygen. I tried those oxygen scavenger caps, didn't notice any difference. But I did notice difference when bottling was getting rid of the oxygen as much as possible. This will be a lifesaver for your more hoppy beers, and of course, why don't do it with all beers? It will give you a lot of longer shelf life. That was a bonus today. We're dry hopping a pale ale with quite a lot of hops. Want to look at the hops? We have 50 grams of Chinook, 50 grams of Simcoe, 30 grams of Citra, and 20 grams of Cascade. The reason for the amount is I had 50 grams of Simcoe left, so I used that. So I matched the Chinook after that. I didn't want the Citra to take over, so put it 30 grams. It might be too much. Can it be too much hops? And I wanted to keep the Cascade down because Cascade can give you really grassy flavors. So let's dry hop the beer and show you how I try to get the most oxygen out. Empty it out, the bubbler. I'm gonna put it back so we don't suck all of that in. I fill my bubbler with star sand and I have no problem with this. So let's add the hops. Here's the beer. We could purge the hops. It's the anal. Why don't we lower it? Let's add the hops. Okay, the hops are in. Let me show you how I do this. Now we will try to purge as much of the air we introduced in the headspace as possible. Push that down to start with, and now we will fill this up. You see how much it erases? Push it down and fill up with CO2. Push it down and fill up with CO2. Push it down, fill up with CO2. This will change out CO2 and air mixture that was in there with pure CO2. Of course, I don't have a clue how many times you should do this, but I will do it a few times to feel sure of myself. This is why I like the soft line. Now we will let this go for about 3 days before we cold crash. I'm gonna move it, then I'm gonna fill up the airlock. That was that. I hope that gave you some new ideas how to start thinking, and I try to implement this way of thinking always. I try to get the least amount of oxygen in my beer after fermentation. I always introduce oxygen before fermentation, but that's another story. We can talk about that in another time. So, cheers guys. Let me know what you think, and if this gave you any ideas, or if you have another way of doing it that would be better. I assure you I have some extra Vaganza ideas which would be needing some construction, but this is a simple setup. We'll see in the future how long we can take this. It's a never-ending story. So, cheers guys. Dr. Hans out.